Around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. I'm going to have a little chalkboard session here. They'll prove everything to make it nice and easy for everybody to understand. But once again, I'd say welcome to everybody around the world and welcome to all my subscribers. Now, I want this video to be universal for everybody, but I would really appreciate if members of Judaism and the rabbis would comb this information over, use their wisdom to interpret it. I really would like to hear their opinion on this because I think this theory here holds some credit. So basically, I'm going to read just 5 verses from the Tanakh, and I only really need to read about 3. The other 2 are just extras. But with these 3, 4, 5 verses from the Tanakh, I think everybody will agree this is some pretty suggestive evidence that God actually told Moses, and in effect told everybody, but that God told Moses way back in time that there would be 6,000 years for mortal man, okay, which would, also imply that at the end of the 6,000 years will come the Messiah, the end of days, the judgment period, and the restoration and everything. Okay, so without further ado, I'll get going, I'll get started. And, if any rabbi does watch this video, please let me know your opinion in the comments section. And I think this is worth serious consideration. So, if we go over here to Exodus 20, okay? I'm going to start off with this and I'll quickly go to Leviticus. In Exodus 20, verse 8, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. 6 days thou dost labor and hast done all thy work. In the 7th day is a Sabbath to Hashem thy God. Thou dost not do any work, thou and thy son and thy daughter, thy manservant and thy handmaid, and thy cattle and thy sojourner, who is within thy gates. For 6 days has God made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and resteth in the 7th day. Therefore has Hashem blessed the Sabbath day and does sanctify it." And then he immediately proceeds into giving the 10 Commandments. Okay, so in this very, plain as day statement, what I'm suggesting is covertly hidden amongst the words is the realization that, as we all know, a day with God is like 1,000 years. Okay, so considering that, let's read this again. I'll do this step by step. So he says, "Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify." What I'm suggesting is that the Sabbath day will be the 7,000th year. Okay, so we're going to have 6,000 years of mortal man. Okay, and then at the end of that will come the Messiah, with the so-called end of days, and that would occur at the start of the 7th. Okay, and that implies that will be the day of rest, the 1,000 years of rest for the earth. So we'll have 6,000 years, which we will have mortal man doing his toil, and then will come that period of rest for 1,000 years. Okay? So considering that, let's read it. It says, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it." What I'm suggesting the interpretation would be is that remember the 7th millennia to sanctify it. Okay, so we have to prepare, just like with a little symbolism of preparing for the 6 days for the 7th, we have to prepare spiritually ourselves for that great day. Okay, and for all we know, we might die tomorrow type of thing, but in general, mankind, we have to prepare. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Remember the 7th day to sanctify it would mean remember the 7th millennia to sanctify it. Okay, which means prepare yourself so that you are, sanctified in preparation for it. In verse 9, 6 days thou dost labor and hast done all thy work. This would be for 6,000 years thou dost labor and hast done all thy work. What's more interesting is if you look up the actual Hebrew term here in verse 9 for you shall labor, okay, which is, I can't pronounce Hebrew, but it's ta'abad or something. If we open up the root term, which is abad, which means to work, to serve, and we look at a definitive range of context for its, the range of context for its definition, what we can find, quite interestingly, is the following. Where was it? It was... can also mean serve, and serve as subjects. Could also be for working for another, to serve someone by labor, or labor, work, do work. And these are the other uses of that term throughout the Tanakh, is become slaves, been slaves, bondage, burdened, enslaved, tiller, subject. So we get this idea that it's servitude. Okay, now that's what I'm getting to here, because we commonly, at the face, I'm not saying that there is no face value interpretation either. I'm just saying this is the deeper level, the more cosmic level interpretation. Okay, 6 days, you do your work. Okay, yeah, so in the tangible earthly sense, you work for 6 days, and then on the 7th day you rest from work. We all understand that. But on the deeper level, 6,000 years, thou is in servitude. Okay, that's really what it's saying. And has done all thy servitude. Okay, and in verse 10, and the 7th day, so that would be, and the 7th millennia, is a Sabbath to Hashem thy God. Thou dost not do any work, any servitude. Thou and thy son and thy daughter, and so forth, even the animals, and the sojourner who is within thy gates. For in 6 days, for in 6,000 years, for 6 days has Hashem made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, and resteth in the 7th day. Therefore has Hashem blessed the Sabbath day and does sanctify it. What's interesting is in verse 10 when it says, in verse 11 when it says, has made the heavens. Okay, so for 6 days has Hashem made the heavens. Let's go open up the Hebrew for that. So if we look in verse 11 there, where it says made, which is the term asah, if we open up the root of that word, asah, which means, the direct definition is do or make, okay? If we look at the, full range of the context of the definition, let me just scroll down here. Oh, it's quite big. It also includes accomplish, advance, appoint, become, bestow. So if we go back to verse 11 and understand it in the context of God has appointed, okay, let's read it in that context. For 6 days has Hashem made the heavens and the earth. On the deeper level, for 6,000 years has Hashem appointed the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and resteth in the 7th day. Therefore has Hashem blessed the Sabbath day and to sanctify it. This is a fair interpretation. I think it could fairly be interpreted like this. And if this is a correct and valid interpretation, and this means that God actually revealed to Moses, and henceforth everybody else, but that he revealed to Moses that there would be 6,000 years to mortal man. Okay, so I'll just read the whole thing again from the start. Okay, so remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. 6 days thou dost labor and hast done all thy work. And the 7th day is a Sabbath to Hashem thy God. Thou dost not do any work, thou and thy son and thy daughter, thy manservant, thy handmaid, thy cattle, and thy sojourner who's within thy gates. For 6 days has Hashem made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and resteth in the 7th day. Therefore has Hashem blessed the Sabbath day and to sanctify it. So not only that, if we then go over to Leviticus 12, interestingly, we see something that reinforces my theory here. Okay? And Hashem speaketh unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the sons of Israel, saying, A woman, when she giveth seed and is born a male, then she has been unclean 7 days. According to the days of separation, for her sickness she is unclean. Okay? And in the 8th day is the flesh of his foreskin circumcised. Now this is quite interesting. So, this is where I have to get into the following. Adam well, even though Adam is counted as the progenitor of the human race and all of that, Adam was not born from a woman. He was not created as a mortal being. He fell from his estate or stature, so to speak, into mortality as a punishment and a curse. Okay? Most importantly, he wasn't created as a mortal, and he wasn't born from a woman. He was not a son of man, even though in a sense he was. In another sense, in an actual sense, he was not a son of man. Okay? Now, since Adam was not a mortal, it's not fair to count the duration for mortals from Adam. If Adam wasn't a mortal, and he lived for a long period of time and whatnot, you should not count that. So who would you take it from? Well, it could have been Cain and Abel, because they were born from a woman in that there. However, Seth is classically regarded as the forefather. Okay, Cain and Abel are not counted as the forefather for the rest of the human lineage. Now, ironically, Adam was 130 years old when he had Seth. Okay, now if we consider that Seth was the first true son of a woman, the first true mortal, okay, then something shocking is realized here. As I'll show on this chart here, okay, which will prove everything. In the Tanakh itself, it clearly states, with its own given numbers, that there are 1978 years from the birth of Seth as the first true mortal son of woman, okay? 1978 years later is when Jacob was born, okay? When Jacob was precisely 109 years old is when Joseph went into Egypt. The Tanakh says that they would spend 400 years in Egypt. Okay? Then we have, where does the Exodus come into play again? I think this one here is the Exodus. And then 480 years, if I'm not getting mixed up here, I think this point here is the Exodus. So 400 years in Egypt, then presuming that I'm correct on that notion here, Exodus. The Tanakh then says that 480 years later, okay, we come to the 4th year of Solomon's reign, okay, which was the year that the temple was built. Okay, so 480 years later, we had the temple built. So I think I am correct here. Exodus was there. I'm correct. Okay, so 480 years later, we come to the 4th year of Solomon's reign, and this is the year that the temple was built. And then if you add up all the years for the kings, okay, it's 423 years exactly. And that means until the temple falls. Okay, let me just hold this a little more sturdy. Okay, and we all know when the temple fell in 587 BC. Okay, now then from there, this is where the biblical record ends. This is where we simply marry it into known and verified history. We know that the Tanakh, and this is how you can connect it, the Tanakh details from the prophecy of Daniel about when the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, both street and wall, would occur, okay? And just as an arbitrary point to fix on, we know that was 457 BC, okay? But we could even take it from here. We don't even have to look at that. We'd even take it from 423, okay? Because that's 587. 587 BC, 2023 AD gives a sum, okay? 2023 plus 587, and then you add all these up. So if we don't want to argue over 457 and King Artaxerxes, if you'd rather not consider that, I know most members of Judaism don't like considering that because it sounds like a Christian thing. You can ignore that. It doesn't make a difference. At the end of the 423 years is when the temple fell. That was 587. Okay, and you can still do it without that. The point is, when you add up all these biblically given supplied numbers, and with known verified history, we get a total sum of exactly 6,000 years. This is not a coincidence. Okay, the Bible literally gives us all of these numbers. There's nothing created or invented or put in. All those numbers are supplied. All these numbers are supplied. That number is directly given. This number is directly given. All of the durations for the reign of the kings is directly supplied. Okay, and from that point there, it's known verified history 587 BC. Okay, and if you wanted to get a little bit more detail, like I said, you could even take it down further with the decree of Artaxerxes, which is 457. Right, so when you add up all of these, it's 6,000 years. Okay, so That proves it's been 6,000 years from the birth of Seth. Now, like I said, Seth was the first born of a woman, okay, the forefather of the human lineage, the first mortal. And what did Leviticus 12 say? It said, a woman, when she giveth seed, that would have been Seth, and has born a male, Seth, then she has been unclean 7 days. Well, that would be 7,000 years. According to the days of separation for her sickness, she is unclean. Now, some might say, why are you counting the seventh day as being unclean? Well, you have to realize, if you're working for 6 days, and then you have a period of 1 day for rest, all of that is part of preparing and bettering the function of the entire body or organism. Okay, so it's like for 6 days you work in a restaurant, but then you spend 1 whole day cleaning up the restaurant. That's part of the required activity to ensure the operation of everything. You see what I mean? So it's technically still unclean for that period until the period of rest is finished, because the period of rest has a purpose. Okay, if we didn't have that period of rest, or if it was broken, then there would be chaos and disorder. The rest is required in order to restore order. So order is not had until the rest is completed. Okay, so I think that's a fair argument there. So be unclean 7 days. And then at the end of the 7,000th year, the Sabbath rest has been finished and completed. So therefore the whole operation has been completed. Okay? And then where it says in the 3rd verse, and in the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin is circumcised, what that would signify is that after the 1,000 years of rest is finished, and like I said, the operation has been completed, what was that operation? Well, it had to do with mortality. Okay? Mortality is bound to flesh, mortal flesh. Every mortal creature on this planet, every creature of flesh is mortal. There's none that are immortal. Okay? So mortality is bound to our flesh. So this circumcision, in my opinion, on a deeper level, isn't referring to body parts. It's referring to physical mortality. So, and in the 8th day is the flesh of his foreskin circumcised. I think that's what it's actually showing. That at the start of the 8th millennia, the mortality, the flesh will have been abandoned. The old body, you know what I mean? That old body type. And everything will be anew. And this makes sense and lines up with tradition. The traditions are that the earth would exist for 6,000 years, then you would have 1,000 years, then there would be the arrival of Messiah and the Almighty. There'd be the judgment. The earth would be restored in whatever way. It would have this great period of rest, and then after that would be a new cycle. So this does fit in with that, right? And if we go over to Genesis 4, in verse 25, and Adam again knoweth his wife, and she beareth a son, and calleth his name Seth. For God has appointed for me another seed instead of Abel, for Cain had slain him. And to Seth, to him also a son has been born, and he calleth his name Enos. Then a beginning was made of preaching in the name of Hashem. So Seth was very, very important, and he really was, because Abel was slain, and Cain was unworthy of being the forefather. So Seth really was the bona fide forefather of the human lineage, and he was, in that sense, in all true regard, the first son of a woman, first son of a man, first mortal to be born. So Leviticus 12 would apply to Seth, right? Speak unto the sons of Israel, saying, a woman. So when Eve bore, instead of a woman, I'll say Eve, and instead of a son or whatever, I'll say Seth, right? Then we can read it and hear it at the deeper level. Speak unto the sons of Israel, saying, a woman, Eve, when she giveth seed, Seth, and is born a male, Seth, then she has been unclean 7 days, 7,000 years. According to the days of separation for her sickness, the sickness would be mortality. Mortality isn't what we were supposed to have, right? And if you have immortal beings, and then some of them are naughty, and they do bad things, and they're mortals because they're being punished, you don't mix the two together. You separate them. You separate the unclean from the clean. Okay, and then you refine the unclean until it is clean, and then the clean parts can go join the other clean. Right? So, speak unto the sons of Israel, saying, a woman, Eve, when she giveth seed and is born a male, Seth, and she has been unclean 7 days, 7,000 years. According to the days of separation for her sickness, she is unclean. And in the 8th day, the 8,000th year, is the flesh of his foreskin, the mortality, circumcised. Very, very interesting. And I'll just finish off with the following. In Exodus 24, verse 15, those are the 3 important verses. These are just supplementary ones. It says, "And Moses goeth up unto the mount, and the cloud covereth the mount. And the honor of Hashem does tabernacle on the Mount Sinai, and the cloud covereth it 6 days." And this is obviously a direct face value story. Like Moses went up there, these things transpired. I'm not saying they didn't happen like this, but on a deeper level, it's cryptically showing us a template, a pattern, right? So Moses goes up to the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. The honor of Hashem does tabernacle on the Mount Sinai, and the cloud covereth it 6 days. So God is there tending earth, okay, for 6 days, 6,000 years. And he calleth unto Moses on the 7th day from the midst of the cloud. So Moses, in this deeper level sense, would represent the worthy of the earth. Okay, so after the 6,000 years, God is going to call out to the worthy of the earth on the 7th day. So when the 6,000 have finished, and it's the start of the 7th, he's going to call out to the worthy on the earth, the ones who are like Moses, and he's going to call out from the midst of the cloud. And the appearance of the honor of God of Hashem is as a consuming fire on top of the mount. Now we all know from the other books of the prophets that when the end days do arrive, there's going to be great heavenly fire coming down, okay, and even around Israel to devour the enemies, right? So it's ironic that this story here about Moses seems to fit this template, right? So God is attending earth for 6 days, 6,000 years. Then at the start of the 7th, he calls out to the ones who are worthy, okay? And the appearance of the honor of Hashem is as a consuming fire. So then great fire will be seen at the top of the mount before the eyes of the sons of Israel. And there you go. That's all I need to read for that one. So that's interesting. And then the last one, Exodus 31. I can read from verse 14. "And ye have kept the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. He who is polluting it is certainly put to death." I think on a deeper level, this is showing that if you're one of the mortals who are still here and alive when the 6,000th year has come to its end, and the 7th starts, which would be the arrival of Messiah, the judgment and all of this here, if you as a mortal haven't gotten yourself right with God, then you're going to die in your mortality. You're not going to be worthy of anything greater afterwards, right? So you have to prepare yourself for that. And if your time of death comes before the judgment day, as it does with most people, you have to prepare for that likewise, right? So, "And ye have kept the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. He who is polluting it is certainly put to death." And also understand in terms of this, if you do prepare during the 6,000 years, okay? If you do prepare for the 6,000 years, and also Judaism and I believe in reincarnation, okay? And we have been here, most of us, doing this work to earn our salvation in probably many prior lifetimes. So over the 6,000 year period, we maybe to each our own, we probably have lived a lot of times, and maybe altogether added up, it has been a lot of time. You know what I mean? So it's not just that we're this little flicker in the wind near the end of days right now. Chances are we probably have lived many times before. It's been a continual struggle, and God's been giving us more chances to refine ourselves, to prepare, right? So all of these 6,000 years are about preparing this great build-up to the great time of rest. So if you have prepared, then you may rest from your mortal toil. That is the reward. But what happens if you don't prepare? Okay? If you don't prepare, that means you're still working during the Sabbath because you didn't prepare so that you could rest. If you're working during the Sabbath, what's the penalty for that? Well, oddly, according to the law of Moses, it's a very harsh penalty of death. Okay? Which sounds a little strange and harsh at face value, but on a deeper level understanding, it makes a lot more sense. If you haven't prepared as a mortal human in all the 6,000 years to prepare it, and your time comes and you haven't prepared, you will not find the rest. You'll be cut off. You'll be given the death penalty. Okay? That is the sum end of mortality, is to die. So, understanding that, let's read it. "And ye have kept the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. He who is polluting it is certainly put to death. for any who does work in it, that person has even been cut off from the midst of his people. 6 days, 6,000 years, is work or servitude done, and in the seventh day is a Sabbath of holy rest to Hashem. Any who does work in the Sabbath day is certainly put to death. And the sons of Israel have observed the Sabbath to keep the Sabbath to their generations is a covenant age during. Between me and the sons of Israel it is a sign to the age. For 6 days has Hashem made the heavens and the earth, and in the seventh day he has ceased and is refreshed. And he giveth unto Moses, when he finished speaking with him in Mount Sinai, 2 tables of the testimony, tables of stone written by the finger of God. So he's telling Moses these poignant things at very poignant times as well, right? But again, if you read this on the deeper level, it's very, very interesting. So let's read from verse 16. And the sons of Israel have observed the Sabbath, that 7th millennia of rest, to keep the Sabbath to their generations is a covenant age during. Between me and the sons of Israel, it is a sign to the age. For 6 days, for 6,000 years, Hashem made, which could also mean appointed. So for 6,000 years, Hashem appointed the heavens and the earth. And in the seventh day, he has ceased and is refreshed. Now that would make sense because we know from tradition 6,000 years, and then the judgment day with everybody believes slightly different, but fire coming down to the earth, probably hailstones, and a restoration of the planet, right? A great period of harshness, and then a period of rest and replenishing, okay? So for 6,000 years, God has made the heavens and the earth. For 6,000 years, God has appointed the heavens and the earth, and then the seventh day he has ceased and is refreshed. Very, very interesting stuff to consider, okay? And like I said, don't forget, the 6,000 years are all meticulously accounted for by the Tanakh itself, okay? So who can really argue with this? We're in the 6,000th year, okay? We really, really are, and it's just astonishing. It also lines up perfectly to the exact year with Daniel's great prophecy from chapter 7, chapter 12, and all of that. But anyways, God bless you all. I hope that Messiah does come this year. I hope that this is the end, and that that the great end will come, the great healing, the great restoration. Let's leave it like that, and we'll get to go on to a more blessed experience and be reunited with all our loved ones who have passed. That's what I really hope for, that we can all be together again, that the world will be a better place, that people will be better, everything will get better. That's what I hope for. So anyways, God bless you all, everybody. Take care.